Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute for today's Small Biz Hangout. I'm Jennifer Shee, the Small Business Coordinator and Program Director at the NHLBI, and I'll be moderating today's session on managing SBIR STTR grants. Our presenter is Andre Walker, Grants Management Specialist with the NHLBI, and will also be joined by Grants Management Specialist Anne-Marie Brazil-Majak for the Q&A portion. Andre is a Grants Management Specialist at the NHLBI with more than a decade of experience in the field of grants management. He spent much of his time managing all aspects of pre-award and post-award functions for a large portfolio of diverse and complex mechanisms. He also knows about grants management on the academic side and other complex program project grants. Between 2011 and 2014, Andre served as the Office of Grants Management SBIR STTR Coordinator and Chair for the Trans-NIH Grants Management Advisory Committee's SBIR STTR Subcommittee, where he promoted consistent procedures and best practices across the NIH for the administration of SBIR STTR grants, as well as serving as a resource for NIH-wide initiatives related to the SBIR STTR programs. You may have met Andre actually at one of the HHS SBIR STTR annual conferences, and if you haven't, you can come join us in Milwaukee next fall. Before joining NHLBI, Andre was a Grants Technical Assistant at the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, NIDDK. He's also just a wonderful person to work with, and we're lucky to have such experienced and dedicated grants experts with us today. So I'm going to turn this over now to Andre.
Thank you, Jennifer, for a very nice introduction. By the end of this presentation, it is my goal to help you understand the general eligibility requirements, budget guidelines, just-in-time preparedness, and post-award activities. So in order for a business to be eligible for a SBIR STT award, it must be a for-profit entity legally formed in the United States. It must also be more than 50% owned and controlled by citizens or permanent resident aliens in the United States. No more than 500 employees can be employed at the company. And basically since the Reauthorization Act was mandated, if an SBIR is backed by venture capital, multiple venture capital companies, it must be more than 50% owned. And this actually only applies to the SBIR. So if there are any concerns, if there is a concern or small business that is more than 50% owned by multiple VCs, there will be a VCOC form that the small business will need to fill out. And that will come when the just-in-time information is requested. Another area we will pay close attention to is your budget request. It is our job to make sure the costs requested are appropriate for the project and are within the guidelines set in the funding announcement. For the Phase 1 SBIR award applying from the omnibus, you have a limit of $150,000. That includes direct cost, indirect cost, and fee. If you request more than $150,000, more than the $150,000 threshold, but less than $225,000 hard cap, that will require strong justification and approval from your program official. If your budget exceeds the $225,000 and the $225,000 hard cap and the $1.5 million hard cap, your project will need to fit within the approved NIH topic waivers. As always, applicants are strongly encouraged to contact NIH program officials prior to submitting any application in excess of the guidelines, and also they should speak with the program official during the planning phases. In all cases, applicants should propose a budget that is reasonable and appropriate for completion of the research project. Regarding third-party involvement, in Phase 1, normally a minimum of 67% of the research or analytical effort must be carried out by the small business concern. In the Phase 2 SBIR, normally a minimum of 50% of the research and analytical effort must be carried out by small business concerns. In the Phase 1 and Phase 2 STTR, at least 40% of the research or analytical effort must be performed by the small business concern. At least 30% of the research or analytical effort must be performed by the single partnering research institute. So the basis of determining the percentage of work is performed by each of the parties will be the total direct cost, or will be the total of the direct cost, the indirect cost, and the fee. So if you have received any indication that you will or you may be receiving funding from NHLBI, you should be prepared to submit just in time when requested by your grants management specialist. In general, you need to submit items like other support, various certifications or verifications like your SBIR funding agreement, your financial questionnaire, your Vertebrate and animal certifications, SBA registry, your Office of Research Integrity Assurance certification, and your VC or venture capital certification if necessary. So other support includes financial resources, whether federal, non-federal, commercial, or institutional, available in direct and of an individual's research endeavors, including but not limited to research grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, and or institutional awards. When providing other support, it should be for all personnel involved. NIH does administrative review before the award is issued. NIH looks for overcommitment of any key personnel. It also checks for possible duplication of scientific goals and financial support of same projects from other sources. Here I've provided a sample of what your other support should look like. As you can see, it should reflect information such as the grant number. I'm not sure, do we have a cursor right here? So it should reflect the grant number, the name of the PI, the person month, performance dates, and your annual direct costs. In addition to the approved support, you should show the applications. You should show the applications that you have submitted and is pending review or approval. After listing the active and pending awards, please identify if there is overlap with the current award. Any and all overlap will need to be identified and removed prior to the award. Your program and grants management specialist will contact you if that needs to take place. If we need to get in contact with you, we will do so via the just-in-time or basically prior to the award. All small businesses that are selected for SBIR funding must complete the SBIR funding agreement certification at the time of award. This includes checking all boxes and having an authorized officer of the awardee sign and date the certification each time it is requested. So with this form, I will cover the one question that seems to cause the most confusion, and that is question number 14. So number 14 asks if your business is a covered small business that was not majority owned by multiple VCs when it submitted the application in response to an SBIR solicitation, and on the date of the SBIR award, which was made around 9 months after the closing date of the solicitation, is majority owned by multiple VCs. So by answering yes, you're stating that yes, from the time that I submitted when I submitted my application, I was not covered by multiple VCs. Now that I'm about to receive the award, which usually is a 9 to 12 month period, things have changed. I am now covered by multiple VCs. In that case, again, you will need to fill out the VCOC certification, and normally we will identify that and we will send that certification over to you once we saw that you've checked yes to this question. Again, in order for this certification to be accepted, you must respond to all the questions and complete filling out the box. Grantee organizations are expected to have certain systems, policies, and procedures in place for managing their own funds, equipment, and personnel. A system of clear roles and responsibilities should be delineated in each grantee organization and should include a financial management system. These systems include but are not limited to accounting, internal controls, and budgetary controls. Demonstrating the grantee's management capabilities is one of the evaluation or criteria used in the administrative review process prior to issuance of award. To encourage uniformity in the review of the grantee's financial management system, NIH has developed a questionnaire entitled Evaluations of Financial Management Systems. The questionnaire is a tool designed to assist both grantee and NIH staff in assisting or assessing the grants management capabilities. Concerns related to the grantee organization's management capabilities may result in determination to withhold an award or issuing the award with special terms and conditions. If there are any concerns, again, we, meaning the grants management specialists and program officials, will resolve those concerns prior to the award being issued. If your research requires the involvement of humans, you should submit your human subject research assurances. You should submit the IRB, the Institutional Review Board approval, and your human subject certifications for key personnel. Please note that your institution may have or must have a separate human subjects assurance. Even though the work will be completed at a different performance site, we cannot issue the award unless your small business has that assurance. If your research requires the involvement of animals, you must submit your institutional animal care and use committee approval. You must also have your vertebrate animals subject research assurances. So with the animal assurances, again, you will need to have your own. If you do not have your own assurance, what grants management will do is submit a request to OLA to initiate this interinstitutional agreement process. So basically, even if you know the process, don't go out and start it yourself until OLA contacts you to get the interinstitutional agreement thing or agreement started. So now that you have received your award, you should always review it. That is very important. It will show you how to set up your accounts to receive funding. It also reflects the terms and conditions and how to appropriately close out your award. Just like during the pre-award phase, you should speak to your program official and grants management specialist whenever you have any questions during the post-award phase. Also, you should also update your SAM registration. We cannot issue any awards unless that registration is current. So I guess I'm going to make the statement again. It is always important whenever you have any uncertainty about with anything regarding your award, please consult the NIH grants policy statement. If you are still uncertain, please contact your grants management specialist and program official. We are here to help in any way possible. Trying to keep you out of that orange jumpsuit, that's one of our goals. And finally, the closeout. So these are some of the general closeout requirements, your final progress report, the final invention statement and certifications, and your final FFR. Again, this information will be provided in the notice of award. There's a special section that tells you or explains to you how to properly close out the grant. And I believe that's everything that we have for you.
Great. Thank you, Andre. So we're going to move on to, as I said, we wanted to leave plenty of time for the Q&A section. Just making that little disclaimer again that these are for educational purposes, not necessarily specific to your award or application, and to reach out at that contact NHLBI SBIR link for any questions you might have. That's also where you can submit your request for slides. And if you're not working in the NHLBI mission space, certainly reach out to the appropriate institute contact that can be found down here. And again, submit your questions through the Q&A panel. And we've gotten a few questions, so we'll definitely be going through them. And I'm going to leave this up here. Again, the listserv, sign up for any future Small Biz Hangouts or in-person events. We also do try to send out useful information like deadlines coming up and other tips and tricks and resources. If you go to this link here, it'll bring you to the website where you can submit your questions or the request for slides. And I guess a couple of things I wanted to raise while we're actually, okay, I will leave this up here for a couple minutes while I talk, and then what we're going to do is switch over to camera so you can actually see that the government is not just, we're not just faceless bureaucrats here. We are actual people. We really want to help you. And I'd also like to make sure to introduce our other special guest here. So we have Andre, who you just heard from. We also have Anne-Marie Brazil-Majak, who's also a grants management specialist at the NHLBI. She's been a grants management specialist for over 20 years, and she has her bachelor's in business from Johns Hopkins, and has been a certified research administrator since 2008. So we've got a wealth of experience here, and you'll find that, at the NIH, there often is a lot of flexibility. There are a lot of different rules, and so it can be very complex to navigate these things. And in particular, we know that the small business program has a lot of different little nuances. So certainly we want you to reach out when you have questions. So I am going to switch over. Hopefully you've written down those, you just signed up. Just sign up while you're seeing it. All right. So are we live? I think so. All right. So let me start with some questions. And I guess one of the items I wanted to mention, just to make sure that it was clear that the period, especially because in the advertising I talked about how to get your award faster. So when you get an email from your grant specialist that's asking for just-in-time information, or that JIT, then that's one you want to reply to, because they need that information before an award can be made, and so generally that information is requested between the time you've applied and before you can actually get an award. And sometimes, so as soon as council approves awards, then we try to get awards made relatively quickly after that, and so they'll need this information for that. So I've got a bunch of questions about the just-in-time, and so the first one is, we've been requested to submit JIT documents. How do we submit them? In what format? Do they have to be uploaded as a single PDF? Do you have to put a cover page listing all the documents? And either Andre or Anne-Marie.
Whether it's one PDF or several, that's kind of a preference for the grant specialist that's listed in the Commons for that grant. If you have everything except for like the IACUC or the IRB is pending, then you could send what you have and then email the rest when it comes in. But again, you should check with that grant specialist that's listed in the Commons to be sure of their preference.
Great, thank you. So a couple of questions actually now about OLA. If OLA hasn't contacted us yet about interinstitutional animal assurance numbers, but all the documents were requested to be submitted in 7 business days. So how do, my questions went away. So how do we, if we can't submit all of the documents in time, what should we do? Should we still wait for OLA? Should we wait for all of the information before we submit that information?
So with regards to the OLA, if we have requested for the just-in-time and you're trying to respond back to us, first, definitely if we're waiting for an interinstitutional agreement, that normally takes longer, and that's not going to come necessarily from you. That's going to come from OLA. So OLA will notify everyone once that agreement has been approved. As far as the other documentation, excluding the interinstitutional agreement information, you should definitely submit that to your grants management specialist.
Thank you.
I think to add to that, because I think that person's request for just-in-time came from the ERA Commons, so their grant specialist may not even be aware that they've been asked for information. So in that case, they should check with the grant specialist, because that specialist could say, whether this grant's even in range for funding, and if they are, then the specialist can check with OLA to start the process.
Correct.
And I guess another couple of questions around that, if you haven't had the animal assurance yet, but your academic institution partner has IACUC approval, do you need to submit documents? Do you just wait for what OLA is going to request of you at that point?
Usually, if they have IACUC approval, when I email OLA to start the process, I may send them a copy. Or at any rate, the IACUC approval will speed up the process for the assurance, because the partner institution's IACUC chair needs to sign that assurance and put down the IACUC approval date, and then they send it back to OLA.
Okay.
Without IACUC approval, that assurance will take as long as it takes to get IACUC approval and then sending the form back.
That can take a little longer.
Yes.
So I guess a bit about timing again, if somebody's been asked for just-in-time information, but obviously funding decisions haven't yet been made. So is there different JIT information that's required immediately and JIT information that can wait until funding decisions have actually been made, or, and if you want, I can.
So if the request for just-in-time is coming from the grants management specialist, I would submit that information as soon as possible, and it's normally everything. So prior to award, we're basically making sure that everything, when you submit, of course, it is appropriate. Everything is current. If there are any concerns regarding whatever the case may be, eligibility requirements or maybe the form, we will ask you to update it. However, for the most part, please submit that everything as soon as possible.
Yeah, and just a comment from the peanut gallery over here, right? So the point of the just-in-time information is, and providing that information, is to let you also have, asking for the just-in-time information before funding decisions are made. The reason is so that the award can actually be made as soon as possible, because a lot of the information that you're being requested, it can take some time to put together. And so we're trying to give you a lead-in time. One of the things you can do is certainly based on your score and the funding and operating guidelines that NHLBI publishes, you can make sort of that determination and talk to your program officer, how likely is it, do you want to spend the time to put together the JIT information? But generally, if you've been requested, it's at least likely enough where, we're not just trying to give you extra work or ourselves extra work. We're trying to really speed up that process. So another question is about whether you have to correct all the warnings in ERA Commons if JIT documents have been requested. So that
sounds like a help desk.
Yeah, so I think if these are warnings that came up when you submitted an application, then no. I mean, in terms of, not exactly. So those warnings were warnings about the application itself. If you have questions about those specific warnings, you should reach out to the ERA Commons Help Desk.
So there's one more thing that I wanted to add with that is, so we do, or majority of us, I believe, prefer to have everything uploaded into the ERA Commons, but it's not required. So if you are receiving error issues and you cannot upload this information in a timely manner, meaning you have contacted the help desk and they're trying to work everything out, but you still want to get things, it's taking longer than expected. I would suggest probably contacting your grants management specialist and including maybe a PDF file, attaching that just-in-time information to the email, letting them know that, listen, I've taken the steps to get whatever the concerns are resolved with the help desk, but it's taken longer than expected, so here you go, basically. We'll go from there as far as determining how we want to move forward.
So I guess we're going to dig in a little bit also around timing for IRB approvals and dates. So how would you respond to the IRB approval and date section if the planned clinical study isn't supposed to start until several months after the funding would start? Do you still have to have it all ready right at that time and submit it?
If the IRB approval is, if the human work is going to be done within the first year or the first 6 months of the grant, then you should have IRB approval before the award is issued. So don't put a date in there, upload the just-in-time and put a note in there that says IRB approval is pending and we expect it, a time frame.
And that's I guess, majority, so I guess it comes to timing also. So if it takes longer than expected, let's say we're in the fourth quarter and it's about doing our reviewing, issuing these awards before the September 30th deadline, we will take into consideration how long it will take, and then once we are able to, we can place a restriction on that award and issue it with a restriction.
And another question around, so on ERA Commons, the JIT panel asks for an IRB date, but if you don't have any human subjects, or let's say you don't have animal work, are those questions on ERA Commons, do you just leave them blank, or do you notify the grants management specialist that you don't need those items?
It should be NA if you're not doing human or animal work, then that should just be blank or NA.
Right.
And around human subjects, there's Exemption 4. So what is Exemption 4? Where can I find information about this and whether it applies to me or not?
There is on the NIH Office of Extramural Research site, I believe there's frequently asked questions on human subjects.
Yeah, so if anything, the NIH is very thorough about trying to document all of this information. So I think if you were to Google search NIH human subjects exemption 4, you will find the NIH website all about human subjects, and it explains that. Also, in the SF424 application guide, there are instructions about how to fill out the human subjects portion of the application, which has a kind of supplementary PDF guide that goes along with describing when does something apply to you. But I believe there's actually even on an NIH website sort of a flow chart for how to decide what human subjects apply to you.
There is.
Where can one find more information about what's considered appropriate accounting and an internal and budgetary controls?
I've had all types of examples. I guess I've seen Excel sheets. I don't know if I can direct you to a particular application or what, but do you have any suggestions?
I mean, you mean accounting systems?
Yeah,
what are the right, like, what's a good, does NIH specify this?
No,
we don't know.
Right. So,
no, I mean, usually the small businesses have accounting software that they buy to keep track of their books.
So it's not just buying. I mean, so it's also, like I said, I've seen them as basic as an Excel spreadsheet, which was acceptable. Again, it's to the discretion of the small business. And,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So NIH doesn't specify, what is appropriate accounting or internal and budgetary controls. It's sort of left up to the small business. And if you want to learn more, maybe also reach out to previous awardees.
Yeah.
They may have a system in place. Generally, people who've had Phase 2 awards,
yes,
likely, because they've been audited.
Yeah, actually, the financial questionnaire does talk about, do you have these things in place?
Right. Like
check signing, that you should have, if you're signing the check, someone else should be looking at it first, to have oversight.
Great. So I'm trying to make sure I'm covering these, all of the questions. So there's a question of when do you need to get approval from NIH and when do you not? So there is an identified sort of list of prior approval items.
That is correct.
And that's in the NIH grants policy statement?
Mm-hmm. So in the NIH grants policy statement.
Do you remember the actual?
I think it was under administrative requirements.
And do you actually remember the number?
No.
13,
But if you search prior approvals.
That is correct. If you search prior approvals, it will show you within the NIH grants policy statement, I believe it's 2016, the actual requirements or what is required to ask for approval from NIH. And again, if that does not give you the answer that you need, definitely speak out or reach out to us and we will help you provide whatever guidance we can.
And if you're so lucky to get the Notice of Grant Award, there's a lot of information in terms and references in the Notice of Grant Award actually to specific policies for the grants
policy statement.
Yes.
And so, you know, that's actually a good resource for you for what do you need to make sure you're doing or not doing, is looking at your notice of grant award. If we resubmit an SBIR application and that received say a good score, when does the original submission get killed? So I'll answer this. So this is about, so if you have a submission and a resubmission in the same fiscal year, let's say, you know, will your original submission not be considered for funding? How does that work? I think that's the core of the question. So if, for example, you submitted to last April's omnibus receipt date, and you're submitting to this January, you're submitting a resubmission to this January receipt date, both of those applications will be considered for FY17 funding. Now, if one of them wasn't discussed, that one will not get funded. If one of them, if the other one scored well, then it will definitely be considered for funding. If both of them scored in the within the select pay zone or within the pay line, if one of them scored in the pay line, that one will likely get funded and selected if it scored better than the other one. But both of them will still be considered. So it won't really get killed, you know, where it will no longer be considered for funding until the next fiscal year.
I mean, I think too, though, with that when you submit your original application and then you submit an amended application, that if we pay the amended application, let's say, when we've awarded that amended application, part of that process is the original application then is automatically withdrawn.
Correct. Or
if we pay the original and not the amended, then when we award the original, the amended is automatically withdrawn.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Thank you for that clarification there. There's actually now a question about intellectual property. So I don't know if you want to cover this, but what happens with IP that's developed as part of an SBIR award? Would you like me to talk about that, or
you can?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know if I have the best information, but intellectual property that's developed as part of an SBIR award is covered under the Bayh-Dole Act, and so you know, the person asking the question has heard, you know, the government gets the license, and any IP that's developed as part of the award has to be manufactured in the U.S. That's not completely true. That's not so. Under the Bayh-Dole Act, you know, the government, anything that's federally funded, we technically have march-in rights, but I have never heard of any situation where that has actually been exercised. As far as manufacturing in the U.S., the fine point there is really your SBIR award dollars are intended to be used in the United States. If you have any foreign components, there needs to be some special, very special cases where that's allowed, and there needs to be permissions and other additional administrative work that needs to be done to make sure that everything is okay, and the State Department has to clear things. But the SBIR dollars that you're getting for your award should be used in the U.S. If you've now commercialized your product, you know, we would strongly encourage you to find a way to manufacture the product in the U.S., but it is not a requirement because of intellectual property rights. And there is an invention reporting requirement. So through iEdison, we do ask that if you've made any intellectual property during the course of your award, that you report that information to us. So there's another question about whether a resubmission, can you only submit a resubmission during the designated period for application submissions for a particular RFA. So if an RFA has only one submission date per year, does that mean any resubmission has to be 1 year later? And yes, so if you are resubmitting to a specific funding opportunity announcement, and RFAs and PARs often have their own unique dates, you can only submit for the dates that are open for that particular funding opportunity. With the omnibus solicitation, that is more kind of open. We have 3 receipt dates each year. So while I'm trying to scroll through more of the questions, do either of you feel like there's something really core that you get a lot of questions about, or hear see a lot of mistakes that you would like? What's the one thing that you would hope that people listening would know? We'll go with.
I'll start off. So I think one of the main things, or the most really moments that I get is when a grantee or a small business, basically my suggestion is always read your notice of award. I think that's very important because I want to say at least each council round when I'm issuing an award, a grantee will give me a call later and say, hey, I received my notice of award. How do I get my funds, or can I start now, or when can I start? And all of that information is provided in that notice of award. So if anything, I would say definitely read your notice of award, and again, always contact your grants management specialist and program official for any assistance that you, or clarifications, or whatever your concerns are. Just contact us. We are here to help you. That's our goal. So.
I echo what Andre said. Please review your notice of grant award carefully. And actually, with regard to drawing down funds and payment management and getting access, if your company has not had grants before with NIH, there is a separate webinar on YouTube under the NHLBI section of Nicole Dunning from the HHS Office of Payment Management talking about just that.
So actually, I think we weren't able to get that one up, but I know that the payment management system, they have regular kind of webinars pretty much every cycle.
They do.
And so it's probably best to sign up for a more recent one anyway. Right. And so last year we had a great Small Biz Hangout with Nicole Dunning from the payment management system to really talk about the nuts and bolts of how do you actually get your money. Okay, we have a couple more questions. And so one is whether for just-in-time, does the small business need to resubmit their budget, so the overall budget?
No, unless it's requested by the grants management specialist. No, they should not resubmit their budget.
Okay, and this is a popular question that I get quite frequently. What is outside testing by a CRO considered part of the 33% for a Phase 1 SBIR's subcontract limit?
The answer is yes.
So it depends. So yeah. This is also something where there can actually be some differences across the different institutes about what is considered part of the company's cost versus what is considered outside subcontractor award. And one of the things that a couple of the items that you might want to consider. So sometimes fee-for-service type activities can count towards the company's cost when it's listed in the company's budget, and is where the intellectual effort and input is really being driven by the company itself. So one example is you have paid for a company, a third party, to produce your drug. Now that may be possibly listed, for example, as a material cost because you are purchasing the production of materials. and that would be part of the company's cost. Service type, maybe animal testing, for example, that if the studies are being run by a third party, but the data is going to be analyzed by the company, that type of outside testing may be considered for part of the company's costs, and you need to think about, for example, things like, are you paying indirect costs to this third party? Because if you are paying indirect costs, that's probably more likely to be a sub-award. Is that company interchangeable with other providers of this service? That might also be considered something that could count towards the company's cost because it's more like you're, it's a vendor, right, as opposed to somebody who's really putting in the intellectual input and effort. But that is something that you should reach out about if you have questions about your specific situation. All right, we have a few more questions. So, pay lines are published, let's see, when do we expect the pay lines for SBIR Phase 1 and Phase 2? So I will say, so currently we do not have the FY17 funding and operating guidelines for the SBIR and STTR programs at NHLBI, but we are hoping and expecting that soon. So I'll be sure to include the link to the page with the funding and operating guidelines on it in the follow-up emails that you'll get. Another question for you guys, how do you view large items of equipment on Phase 1 and 2 budgets?
If that equipment is necessary for the project and you have it justified in your budget justification, then it's fine.
Agreed.
I think we may have covered all the questions. I'm still see. So if for people who've been asking about the slides, you need to submit a request for those slides. They are not just posted right now. I think we may have covered all the questions. Perhaps send it again if you haven't heard. Okay. So actually, another question about pay lines. How do fast tracks get considered? And so if you look at the former last year's FY16 funding and operating guidelines, you'll see that we had separate pay lines for SBIR Phase 1, R43, and a pay line for R44 applications, which are fast track, Phase 2, and direct to Phase 2. Those are all using the R44 mechanism. So fast track is considered with the Phase 2 pay line and funding operating guidelines. The STTR had a separate zone of consideration because the budget for STTR is much smaller than the SBIR pool, and so we really needed to manage that in a different way. So there's another question about whether, we're a small business that is not owned by venture capital. Are we eligible? Yes. So just to clarify some of the comments or notes about venture capital owned companies. So the majority of awardees do not have any funding from venture capital, and it was in the reauthorization of 2011 that it was allowed for companies that did have some venture capital backing and some ownership, but not a majority ownership, that they were allowed to apply to the SBIR program because previously they were just not allowed at all. Companies, small businesses that are majority owned by a single venture capital operating company are still not eligible for SBIR or STTR funding. And companies that are majority owned by multiple venture capital operating companies are eligible as long as no single VC owns a majority of that company, and they're eligible for SBIR funding only, not for STTR. So if you, to request slides, because we're getting more questions about that, let me just share this. There we go. All right. So if you would like to request slides, please submit your inquiry here. And when you log out here, you're going to get a little feedback form. We really do appreciate your comments and thoughts. And thank you very much for joining us. I think this concludes our webinar.